All right. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being here and joining us today. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Fenwick McKelvey. I'm joined by Megelas here on my left, and we're coming to you from Jojage or Montreal. We're very happy to be here representing Concordia University's relatively new, I think 1 year old, Applied AI Institute. And for those who don't know, the Applied AI Institute is an interdisciplinary university research institute, and we're doing a number of different works on artificial intelligence, and we'd like to share today some of our work on community-based action research, which is something that we're developing at the AI Institute. So we're two of a small team right now, but it's rapidly growing. So you can see my co-director, Tristan Galtard, and Lindsay Rogers, and Nick Gertler are all part of the team here. So I just want to also say that this is a group effort that you have two representatives of. Importantly, the Applied AI Institute has, I think, distinguishing series of values that we really think of kind of center. And this is one of the kind of projects we've been working on, is how to embed these values in our research and also our engagement. We're an institute that works on a number of different levels. We are working in research. We are working in improving access to AI education and training. We are doing research like our Women in AI project, which is trying to identify barriers to women's participation in artificial intelligence, as well as trying to develop an interdisciplinary research team and approach to artificial intelligence and its development. Our talk and the purpose of this talk today is to encourage you to start your own AI CBAR today. And if you're wondering, you might be confused. What this talk will do is identify what is the problem with AI assessment, what is a community-based action research approach, and what is Montreal's AI CBAR. And what I'm hoping you get out of this today is understanding what and the significance of this intervention is, how this makes a difference in a lot of our approaches around AI ethics, and why I think this community-based action research approach that Alex and I and the team at the AI Institute are trying to cultivate in Montreal is something that might be of benefit to Toronto and other cities around the Ontario or the rest of Canada. So I want to begin by situating this context. And so I'll set this up, and then Alex, who's got the expertise in community-based action research, will transition. I'm doing okay in terms of hearing, talking, speaking. So I want to begin by saying that Canada is in a very awkward spot. Canada has led the world in promising to be the first government globally to have a pan-Canadian AI strategy. And so we've seen tremendous investment in artificial intelligence and artificial intelligence funding, some of which might have benefited members of this community. And yet, at the same time, now everyone's freaked out. Artificial intelligence is going to ruin the world and kill humanity. And so it's this kind of moment where, how can we make AI good? Which there's been a variety of solutions to solve. This is where the intervention of our work is trying to come about. Good, and I'm using here in quotes, is a very loaded term and one that's been often contested. So who counts or decides what's good is part of what is motivating our own interest in interventions today. One of the ways this has been solved is through the responsible use of artificial intelligence. The government of Canada, led by the Treasury Board, has had two planks and pillars to fix this problem of good artificial intelligence. One is an AI procurement list. Two is an algorithmic impact assessment. An algorithmic impact assessment is used, or should be used, and there's been some kinks in that should part, but should be used to ensure that any technology being used by the government has a risk assessment and those risks are mitigated. The challenge, as we will talk about with this tool, is that it's very much a risk survey. And so we see this opportunity where there's a need to ensure that there's a responsible deployment of artificial intelligence, and yet the techniques to do so are bringing people together, but maybe not as effectively as we should. Now, this is something which I'll say is replicated globally. Canada has become influential as a leader in responsible AI and celebrated for its algorithmic impact assessment. So this is something that we see as a real intervention. There's lots of attention and effort being put into the algorithmic impact assessments, but we also see gaps. One of the parts is what we see is really how this process works is you begin with the AI solution, you have the assessment, and then you finally reach the community. And so this really is a top-down approach. It is also an ad hoc approach, so that perpetually you're depending on communities' precious time, limited resources, and often an inability to having the expertise to meaningfully consult and give guidance. So how can we reverse this trend? What we believe is that community-based action research is a way that community can develop capacity that will improve the assessment and ultimately build better AI solutions, but also critical expertise around the consequences and social impacts of artificial intelligence. This is something we all see, but we feel that this is a different way, certainly beginning with the community first rather than technology first. And with this, I'll pass it over to Alex to introduce some of the work on.
Sure. And maybe if we could just split back to the other slide for about a second, because I think that as a guiding framework is really is at the core of what we're really advocating for. What we've seen in our work, and I'm sure many of the work that you folks are involved in, is that AI, as it presents itself within our sphere of civic engagement in municipal spaces, is guided by entrepreneurialism, and it's guided by research, and it's guided by, I think, a fairly high level sphere of policy. But it's primarily informed by community-based concerns and by a drive for community-led control of the spaces that belong to us. And so the idea of community-based action research is something that's always been at the core of my own interests in doing research work. Coming out of having done community activism in Montreal for 20 years, and finding myself in this sphere that I'm kind of uncomfortable in and trying to make sense of it. For many years, I was involved with the Park Extension community in Montreal. It's a poor neighborhood that's really taken a hit right now, primarily as a result of the presence of a university campus, Campus 1000, which is a campus that's dedicated to science, to technology, to AI. It's a campus of the Université de Montréal. And so no surprise, students who want to attend classes at the campus, they want to go live in the neighborhood that's adjacent to their campus. And so they're driving up rent and folks are moving out. It's oftentimes, as is the case in relation to AI, Campus 1000 tends to talk about the social benefits of artificial intelligence. But when we look at the real life impact, within that space, well, rents are going up and folks need to move out. And so the idea of creating a community-based action research with a localized mandate came up. And essentially how it works is we've got researchers from all 4 universities who commit to terms of engagement that are about kind of checking that enthusiasm that oftentimes comes out of research to drop into context that we're not from, to position our work in relation to issues that we've never experienced ourselves, whether that's poverty, gentrification, systemic racism and indifference, and oftentimes do so by using techniques that further entrench those divides and perpetuate extraction and control and centralization as a primary reason for how and why research exists. And so the terms of engagement that were set forth when we came up with the ParkX community-based action research, well, one, if you're going to tap folks for their lived history and their localized expertise, you got to pay folks, and you can't just drop in with like an awesome shirt-funded project right at the end and expect that folks are going to open their doors. You got to consult and bring people in from the start. And so one, I think it really allowed for that space that named the ways in which we collectively committed to engaging with that local context. 2, it allowed for folks who do community work to not have to constantly field calls by profs and students and researchers wanting to interview and place students, stagiaires, et cetera, because folks would send those requests to us as a network. And 3, it allowed for the creation of mobilization campaigns that stemmed very, very effectively from local concerns, but also got researchers to use the letters after their names publicly and effectively in denouncing, those kinds of systemic indifference and forms of oppression that I was talking about. And so it's a project that really ran its course for, that's still, that's still happening, but it had a really strong drive for about 4 or 5 years, and it's still, going on. And it was primarily the driver for us saying, okay, well, let's look at replicating this model, but in relation to Montreal AI. And so now we're in the process of creating an AI CBAR network. So to again bring folks out to the yard who do AI research, but in critical ways and in aware ways, and who understand that you can't talk about smart cities till the cows come home, and that doesn't make any sense at the end of the day. That you really need to commit to some amount of specificity, and figuring out what that means. And so we've created this Montreal AI CBAR network. And we want to talk about it with folks. Essentially what it looks like, it's a light model. We meet every 2 months. We've come up with terms of engagement. We figure out who it makes sense to invite at the beginning, kind of gets some of this stuff. And then you keep growing, and then folks come out to meetings every couple of months and I have this project, and you commit to accepting critiques when it's directed your way, and you commit to adjusting. And it's a really nice way to I think to shift the bar in terms of how this stuff kind of gets talked about, but it's light enough that it can kind of run itself, once you kind of got it going on and you got a good pool of folks who are committed to doing it. But what it really allows us to do is to have this kind of central space that reoccurs and checks in every couple of months, so that the energy doesn't dissipate after a campaign that's leveled at a developer, or at a research institution, or at a public arts program, that's like hogging all the funding to put up murals or what have you. And so you can do the campaign after campaign after campaign as part of the same space, while at the same time developing these good feelings of kinship and familyship and communityship, because you recognize the folks that keep coming back out. And so maybe I'll leave it at that, and we'll
Yeah, I think as one part of the Applied AI Institute, one of the really interesting things is we see this as kind of incubating and developing and starting up this AI CBAR, but our hope is that ultimately this becomes part of the community and we become a member of it, and something where, as Alex was saying, researchers, community members, technologists meet together and are willing to commit on a relationship of reciprocity to ensuring that the research is done in a way that actually benefits and counts as for what's good for the community. So for those who are interested in how this process works, one of the beginnings is, as Alex said, we began with a small group of interested parties and members, trying to ensure that we had a beginning or initial representation. What we worked on over about a 4-month period was developing our mission, which you can see, just go back one. So our mandate, so trying to embed what are the kind of values and what's motivating this. And this is something we see that could be a benefit across Montreal and a benefit to communities that are both impacted, but also see potential opportunities in using artificial intelligence. So this is something that is really trying to be intentional in how we're engaging. That's led then to a second part, which is our terms of engagement, which is really saying, what are the expectations of people to participate? What do we expect to commit and to hold to? And this is something which is a living document, but it's sets out how we can start growing the institution, so that we ensure that those who are joining at least understand some of the values and are coming in with an expectation. They're committing to that and are accountable. And ultimately, this is something that we also hope to hold ourselves accountable for as well. And this, I think, becomes an important first step. So where we are now is, so you can see here's our kind of founding members of Montreal's AI CBAR. What we are hoping to do next, and this is something that we're also very interested in discussions with many of you, is who else and how else do we grow this network to connect with other members of the community? What are the other civil society groups, nonprofits, community groups? How do we widen this out? And this is something that I think we'd love to have in discussion at the break. And I also think this is something that becomes, and we're happy to be here to share our own experiences and our own attempts at an AI CBAR, for hopefully this might inspire other members in the Toronto community and elsewhere. I really think that as someone who spent a lot of time as an academic researching the consequences and ways of talking about the development of responsible AI, this is an important development, and one that's very different from many of the kind of proposals that have been forward, assessment, auditing, ethics. Here I see a way of trying to ensure that communities have representation, are building capacity, and ultimately there's accountability shared between all members of research projects about the applications of artificial intelligence. This is something that we see and hope would become a network globally. And if anything, our example in Montreal are sharing here is that first step of doing that knowledge dissemination and seeing what I think is an important development, the future of responsible AI. Thank you.